Welcome back to the Grease Goblins Rereads channel. Today's video, we're going to be doing Sansa 6, A Clash of Kings, aka Cersei 1, A Clash of Kings. And why do I say that? Cersei is really the main focus of this chapter. And yes, Sansa is definitely part of this chapter, and she's definitely learning, and there are parts of Sansa's chapter that are important for this. But this in reality is a lot like what I've said for Sansa, really the entire book. Sansa is a character that is great for other characters involved in King's Landing. So for instance, the Hound. She is mainly how we get his plotline, which has now boiled over right now to where he's kind of betrayed the Lannisters. He's not willing to go lead a sortie and do combat anymore. Or we have her in chapters where she's an alternate POV to Tyrion, where we see Tyrion's actions really just through Sansa's eyes. This one is almost blatantly, we're seeing Cersei through Sansa's eyes and getting more into her as a character, especially as the stakes are being heightened. Tyrion seems like he's losing the battle. Things are going badly. And you have Cersei where she's in a drunk state. She's a lot more open than she usually is. She sees her impending death and doom, and so she's a little bit more forthcoming than she usually is. All of that is great, because everything that we talk about with Cersei in A Feast for Crows, you see it in this chapter. Now, not fully, of course. We don't see, for instance, like the Valonqar prophecy or any of that kind of stuff, but we get those little things that open up the door for who Cersei is as a character and what motivates her. And it's really important given where A Storm of Swords is going to go with her plotline. And so one last thing before we start the reread, I do want to say this will be the last reread of the year. I don't post rereads in December, and I know this is the first year that I'm posting in December on this channel. I just don't post in December because for my main channel, I post pretty much daily all the way into December. And so I just won't have time for the reread. So this will be the last chapter of the reread till the very end of the year. And as we get into the next year, we'll finish up the book really in probably the first 2 months of the year. And so I just wanted to point that out right away. I thank you for everybody that's followed me on this journey with the Clash of Kings this year, watched my Game of Thrones reread as it was re-uploaded, the new podcast, which the podcast will continue on, just given I don't have to do a ton with those outside of just putting them together and then recording the intro. So those will still be up every week, and I have all those kind of being planned and scheduled as we speak. So enjoy those, and we'll kind of get back into the reread in January. But let's continue on with this chapter and dive into Sansa 6. So page 636 opens with the Queen's ballroom glowing with torches reflected from silver sconces, yet a sense of dread hangs over the room. Sir Ilyn Payne stands silently by the back door, pale-eyed, none moving, refusing both food and drink. I don't know why this kind of reminded me just of the others, just the way that they don't seem to eat or drink either. And Ilyn Payne is kind of this sense of death and darkness in this chapter, especially where you look at the Queen's ballroom. It's this place that should be peaceful, should be having, some enjoyment. It's that outside dread. And so what Ilyn represents is, well, figuratively and literally, is that impending doom and death. It's a reminder of what is possibly to come if Tyrion loses the Battle of the Blackwater. Lord Giles Rosby's constant rattling cough adds to the unease, as Osney Kettleblack slips in to deliver messages to Queen Cersei, whispering updates. Sansa notices his scabbed cheek scratches and smells of horse as he kneels beside Cersei's high seat. Osney reports the fleets are locked in battle, and although some archers made it ashore, the Hound has cut them to pieces. He says Lord Bywater has sent the Gold Cloaks to deal with rioters in Flea Bottom, and that the chain has been raised as Tyrion's signal is confirmed. Baelor's sept is overflowing with people praying as the city trembles, and when Cersei asks about her son, Osney tells her that King Joffrey went to the Great Sept for the High Septon's blessing and is now walking the walls with Tyrion, lifting the men's spirits. So really what we're getting is an update. It's all the people in King's Landing that aren't involved in the battle being told of what's happening. And so that's going to be a part of this chapter as well, as this chapter is happening basically at the same time, interspliced between the Davos and Tyrion chapter. So we're kind of getting updated on things happening in the background and how that's going to dictate, Cersei's actions and what she's going to do during the rest of the night. As we get into page 637, Cersei drinks richly from arbor wine and seems more beautiful and feverish as Sansa notes her eyes of wildfire. So once again, we kind of get a note to the Lannister kids possibly having some connection to Aerys. The eyes of wildfire are really interesting because we know Cersei has like the green eyes and she's described as having very beautiful eyes. They also reflect the battle going on outside, but also foreshadowing who Cersei will become. She's becoming more and more like a Eris 2.0, more or less. And so that's also some nice foreshadowing to that as well. The hall is filled with entertainers, musicians, jugglers, moon boys, or tantos, but the merriment feels hollow. And the feeling I got is, if you've ever been at something like that's horrible, like a funeral or, I don't know, some bad situation, or say you get in a breakup and you have people around you that are trying to make levity of the situation, trying to cheer you up, and it just kind of rings hollow because you're just not in that state. Jokes and things like that are not going to help you. And so I kind of specifically remember the night that I had a breakup. So I remember playing video games with some of my friends pretty much directly after. And it was kind of that feeling where it was like, you're there, but you're not really there. Like, there's people trying to cheer you up, and it's kind of like that uneasiness because they obviously know how you're feeling. But at the same time, it's like they don't know how to make you feel better, and there maybe isn't that way to do that. So that's kind of what I think about here with Sansa in this chapter. Is it's like there's all these distractions going on. There's all these things trying to make people feel better, but you just can't. Everyone is just thinking about the battle. There's nothing that can distract them from that. And people seem to laugh, but it doesn't really seem to be actual laughter. It just seems to be them going through the motions. The food tastes of fear, as many in the hall have no real appetite. And how can you be eating at a time like this, where all of their lives may be at stake? Lord Giles coughs, Lawless Stokeworth trembles, and a young bride breaks into tears as tension and anxiety are pervasive. Cersei just seems very irritated by any minor disturbance. Cersei basically has this woman, or this young bride, basically has her taken away, told to give her more or less drugs and just to go to sleep. And Cersei dismisses the tears as being a woman's weapon. You can use your tears to manipulate men and even other women, all that kind of stuff. And one thing that Cersei's really going to try and teach Sansa in this chapter is how to manipulate people, whether that's using tears or other things like her womanly parts. And so that's one thing that's interesting is like Cersei, to me, has such a love-hate relationship with Sansa. Because I think in this chapter, Cersei especially sees a lot of herself in Sansa. Their situations are actually quite similar. And so I think that's really interesting as well. Like Cersei is, on one hand, she dislikes Sansa because she isn't willing to grow up and she's not willing to see the world for what it is, especially in Cersei's way of thinking. But at the same time, she also sees herself in Sansa as well. But she contrasts the way the woman's weapon is tears with a man's being the sword. But Sansa comments that, well, that might be true, but men also have to be very brave. They have to go out there and fight and die. But Cersei scoffs at this, saying she'd rather be doing that than sitting here and having basically nothing that she can do. She has to sit with all these frightened people, in her own words, and she has to just wait. And I think that's really interesting because, we see this also with Brienne and Catelyn in their conversation earlier in the book. Well, not that earlier, but, a good amount of chapters ago, about the idea that it's worse for Brienne to have to sit here and just be doing nothing than to actually be fighting in battle. So Cersei is very similar to Brienne in that regard. And I can completely understand that. I hate being helpless and not being able to do anything at all. And I think most people feel that way. So you totally understand what Cersei's saying here. But at the same time, do I want to be involved in a battle where wildfire's consuming people at an alarming rate and people are dying to horrible injuries? I don't know about that either. And Cersei even shows contempt for the people that are around her, and Sansa more or less is saying well, you asked these people to sit with you. Why would you do that if you didn't want them to be here, if you didn't like them? And Cersei just explains that it's straight up political. It has nothing to do with Cersei caring about their well-being, that she needs the men that are married to these women, or the fathers of these people, because those are the important people. Cersei very much plays out in this chapter that she is very jealous of men, that she would rather be a man because they get respect and all this kind of stuff just because of their parts. And so you can totally understand Cersei, and I actually sympathize with Cersei in that regard a lot. Why are men in complete control of everything? Women have almost no real power or any way to control their lives. They're told who to marry, they're told to have children, and that's basically their value. Once they can't have children anymore, they're almost disregarded from society. And many women die in childbirth as well. So I definitely agree with what Cersei kind of brings up, that idea of the inequality between the genders. And so I'll say that, but I think that the way Cersei acts is not necessarily a good reflection of that. But I'll say that Cersei's actions are not justified in any regards because of those ideas that may be true. She takes it a little too far at times. But she also points out the idea that, like, Cersei has a reputation as well. She has to show that she was courageous and that she was willing to be brave for all these other women and all this stuff during these times of peril. If they're able to win somehow, that's going to help the Lannister name. And so she blatantly tells Sansa that what she's doing is for PR. It's not for any, like, actual good reason, like she wants to protect these people. It's just for PR. That's all it is for. Cersei admits a fallback plan, though. If the city is taken, if Maegor's holdfast holds, she might offer to yield in person to Lord Stannis to spare the worst. And so Cersei's thinking of the idea of, like, if she surrenders, this might spare some of the people around them. Maybe they won't be sexually assaulted or just assaulted in general. It might save them. Like, they'll be taken prisoner, of course. Cersei probably understands at this point she's going to be beheaded. If she's captured by Stannis, she's going to die regardless, which is a lot of the reasons why I think her plan at the end makes a lot of sense for her personally. But Cersei also kind of has a backup plan as well, but we'll see that here in a little bit. She also bluntly warns that if the holdfast falls first, though, the guests may suffer sexual assault, mutilation, torture, and murder. But Sansa doesn't really understand this. As why would soldiers attack innocent women, children, the elderly, the young? Why would they attack these kind of people? Why would they do these horrible things? That's not at all what Sansa's been taught to believe, but this is where Cersei gets to the heart of it. And Cersei's completely right. Don't even get me wrong. Like, Cersei in a lot of regards is wise in what she's telling Sansa throughout this chapter. Sometimes it's a little too far, but she's right. And so that leads us into page 638, but, like, what Cersei says is that soldiers crave flesh more than ransom, especially when they've been killing men, they've been dying, all this kind of stuff. They've seen horrors. Gold isn't necessarily on their mind, you know, and it's horrible. It's horrible what soldiers will do. It's horrible what violence will cause. This is still something that's a problem today. I mean, you think about wars in foreign countries and the things that happen. I think this was especially the case, I would say, earlier in history, but this still happens today. It's terrible the way that war changes people. And that's really what A Feast for Crows is about. A Feast for Crows, its main central theme is on this exact premise. And so, again, I think there's a lot of nods from this chapter specifically to what A Feast for Crows will be built upon. Sansa also kind of brings up the idea, well, aren't they also nobles? So shouldn't they be, just captured for ransoms? But Cersei tells her that yes, to a degree, that the women of noble birth will be protected a little because of, well, the gold, but it doesn't offer them true protection, right? And the people around them are even in a worse state. People like servants and commoners will suffer far worse. Multiple sexual assaults during the day, maybe being killed, mutilated, all that kind of stuff. It is just terrible. Cersei continues even more as she warns that even the old or unattractive could be attacked. Enough drink will make blind washerwomen and reeking pig girls seem as comely as you. When Sansa timidly asks me, Cersei scolds her to stop sounding like a mouse and reminds her that she's a woman now, betrothed to Joffrey. Cersei, again, is just very frustrated by Sansa not understanding the way the world works. And don't even get me wrong, Cersei's right about most of the things she's saying, but Cersei comes off as that person that's like, if there's ever a person in your life where they're saying stuff that you might agree with, but it's like, it doesn't seem like the time or place to be saying them. So for instance, this video is going to come out around Thanksgiving. We always think about the memes that it's like, don't bring up politics at Thanksgiving, don't bring up this or that. Like, even if you might agree with the politics somebody is saying in your family, it's like a big no-no. Don't spark an argument, all that kind of stuff. It's kind of the same idea I get here. It's like, Cersei, is this really what you should be telling Sansa, who, yes, she has had her period, so by Westerosi standards, she's a woman now. She's still very much a girl. She's extremely young. Is this the kind of stuff you should be telling her? Also, you think about it, we're on the brink of all of us dying because of Stannis winning the battle. This is what we're talking about. That's kind of the way I look at it. Cersei then cynically says that if it were any man but Stannis, she might try to beguile him, but have a better chance of seducing his horse. And we've already seen Cersei try and do this. She tried this exact tactic on Ned Stark, and it didn't work all that well. And mainly because Ned Stark just doesn't cheat, for one. Unless you believe Ned and Ashara and things that went on there, but I don't. Cersei knows it's even a worse chance with Stannis. Stannis is not going to be swayed by, especially the attractiveness of a woman. Like, he just doesn't care about that kind of stuff. And so Cersei realizing this isn't going to go well. And you even see, like, Sansa noticed this in her last chapter. Like, Cersei's dressing up very innocently, but she's also trying to dress up to be very attractive as well. That's what Cersei's trying to do. Cersei's trying to use her clothing, her looks to try and get out of the situation she's in. And this also seems to shock Sansa. Cersei continues saying that tears aren't a woman's only weapon. The one between her legs can be just as powerful, and men use their swords freely enough, both kinds. Now, Cersei's also not wrong here either. We do see that a lot of the ways that women have power in the society is over usually their husbands, and usually that's with sex or things like that. Like one of the things that Daenerys tries to do in book 1 is to get Drogo to go to Westeros, she tries to broach the subject of going there after sex. And so that's really important, is that women usually do not have power on their own, and so they have to try and get that through their husbands usually. And that is not to always say that is the case. You think about, for instance, Alysanne. Like, she was an actual queen. She seemed to have her own power, but part of that is she had a lot of influence over Jaehaerys. There are people like Visenya, for instance, who had a lot of power in her own right. Again, she had a lot of influence over Aegon. So it comes down to the fact of like, how much influence do you have over the men in your life? And so that's, I think, what's more important that Sansa should be realizing here. Now we know what Cersei does. Cersei will sleep with a lot of different people to try and, one, have her own urges fulfilled, but two, trying to get people to go to her side when it's obviously not a good thing that she's doing. It's going to, again, come to rear its ugly head in A Feast for Crows. Ironically enough, at this, the Kettleblack brothers enter. Now we know there's going to be some sleeping around dealing with the Kettleblack brothers, but it's interesting that that gets brought up right after this conversation. Breaking the moment, Sansa notes their easy charm and gossip about their strength and favor in the castle. But she also knows that people think that somehow the Kettleblacks might even be better than the Hound. That tells you how blind people can be and just how they're charmed so easily by these people. And Osney's going to bring in a report more or less from the end of Davos's chapter now to Tyrion's chapter and continuing to catch up Cersei on the situation. Osney reports that the hulks have exploded and the Blackwaters aflame with wildfire, over 100 ships burning. Cersei, seeming to just kind of disregard this, asks more about Joffrey as she's concerned over her child. Osney assures her the king is alive at the Mud Gate with Tyrion, bravely rallying the archers. She warns him he had best remain a live boy. As Osfrid Kettleblack then brings darker news. Guards caught a groom and 2 maidservants trying to escape through a postern gate with 3 of the king's horses. People are starting to lose faith. They're seeing the dire situation brewing, and many of them will try to flee. As we get into page 639, Cersei orders that the captured traitors, a groom and 2 maidservants, be executed by Sir Ilyn Payne, and their heads mounted on pikes as a warning. She turns the act into a lesson for Sansa that mercy invites betrayal, and fear is the only way to keep people loyal. And again, it's Cersei trying to teach Sansa in a lot of ways, which is weird given the way this chapter is going to end. But again, it shows you that Cersei does have a bit of, maybe not pity for Sansa, but she sees herself in her. And she's trying to groom Sansa to be kind of like a version of herself in a lot of ways. But we know this not to be the case. Fear is not the only way to keep people loyal. Now, you do need a certain amount of fear. If people don't fear you at all, then yeah, they're just going to push over you, like Aenys, for instance. But it's important to have some of it. So, for instance, Aegon or Jaehaerys, both of those kings wielded fear in an effective way that helped stop rebellions or war in the future. Sansa obediently agrees, but inwardly just rejects this lesson. She knows that's not the case. She believes that love is the truer path to loyalty, and I think she's right. Love is a better path to getting people to obey you. But as we all know, there is a middle ground that you have to appease to be an effective ruler in a lot of ways. The next course is crab claw pies and roasted mutton with leeks and carrots. It is served, but the hall remains tense and miserable. People aren't worried about food. They don't care about it. And the tension continues to get worse. Lala Stokeworth vomits over herself and her sister. Lord Giles drinks himself unconscious. And Cersei looks down on them with open contempt, calling Giles a waste of manhood and mocking herself for ever demanding his release. Ironic given what she's going to do with Giles in the future, again using him. Again, there's a ton of foreshadowing to A Feast for Crows in this chapter. Osfrid Kettleblack returns to report that wealthy citizens are gathering outside, begging for refuge inside the castle, but Cersei refuses them, ordering to turn them away or kill a few with crossbows if they refuse to leave, and forbids any sorties or open gates. And Cersei, in a lot of ways, is kind of being blinded by her own fear to not let the gates be opened, maybe them trying to take over the castle once the gates are opened, and just the idea that, like, she doesn't care about these people. Just genuinely. She's not Edmure. Edmure cares about his people. Cersei does not. Cersei is willing to protect herself and is very selfish in that way. But she's also realizing, like, let's say there was a siege, for instance. She wants few people to, have to try and feed as possible. And at this, we start to see as Cersei is becoming more and more drunk. Her anger flares as she wishes she could behead them herself. Growing drunker, she reflects bitterly on her childhood with Jaime, how they were indistinguishable as children but treated entirely differently once he was given a sword. This is where we get a lot more of who Cersei is as a person. Why has she become the bitter woman that she is? And a lot of it comes down to the way she's treated as a woman compared to her brother Jaime, who was treated as a man. And there's a lot of really deep and interesting themes here. Because Cersei talks about how there was a point in which she and her brother could completely switch lives. She could live Jaime's life and he could live hers, and nobody would even really know the difference outside of maybe their mother Joanna. And whereas Cersei, when she got older, she was taught to smile, sing, and please, Jaime was taught glory in arms and was able to defend himself, become this great warrior, and make a name for himself. Cersei wasn't given any of that. She was destined to be sold like a horse, to be ridden and beaten. And what I think is so interesting is, Cersei's right. So many women in this society have no control over their life at all. They don't get to choose who they're going to marry. They're sold off to whatever political marriage is needed. And that can be to cruel people that are just horrible husbands. And Cersei has no say in it. Cersei, her whole role in society is to provide children, especially for Robert so that he can have heirs. And you especially think about the relationship between Cersei and Robert. Cersei's right. Cersei walked into that marriage with Robert, actually, liking him and wanting to be a good queen to him. And Cersei's not the most likable person in the world, of course. But then Robert, being the person that he is, made Cersei who she is even more. Cersei already had those inclinations of being a horrible person, but she wasn't that already. But she wasn't as bad as like she is now. A lot of her marriage with Robert is the reason that happened. And this is why in a lot of reasons that Cersei, I think subconsciously does feel a little bit of pity for Sansa, because Sansa in the same regard has had the same situation as Cersei in a lot of ways. Sansa is being betrothed to Joffrey, who's a horrible person to marry. But there is a big difference. Sansa was pushing for it. She wanted to marry Joffrey, and unfortunately didn't turn out to be the best. And Cersei herself, Cersei was pushing for marrying Rhaegar. Then she was kind of okay with marrying Robert. That didn't turn out to be the best. So Cersei can see herself a lot in Sansa overall. And it also reminds me of especially the route that they went with the character of Alicent Hightower in the show. And there's a lot of parallels between Alicent and Cersei in terms of this part of their life, like being a young girl, being forced to marry somebody that maybe you didn't necessarily want to. It's very different in Alicent's case, given she was marrying like a full-fledged adult way older than her. Not the same with Robert and Cersei. They were much closer in age, but still, there's a lot of the same beats. When Sansa even tries to comfort Cersei by saying that she became queen, one of the most powerful women in Westeros, if not the most powerful, Cersei replies coldly that when it comes to swords, a queen is only a woman after all. A line that captures really her resentment and her powerlessness in really even one line. Like, she has risen to being the queen of Westeros, and still she doesn't have a whole lot of power and influence. Now, I would disagree with this. I think Cersei does have a lot of power and influence that she doesn't wield effectively a lot of times. And that's really seen through, I think, really the whole series. As that gets us into page 640. Cersei then refuses more wine, saying she must keep her head clear despite her earlier drinking. Cersei's already drunk, but she's trying to not get blackout drunk, I guess. But the final course is then served, goat cheese and baked apples. This fills the hall with cinnamon as Osney Kettleblack enters once again, basically giving his final report. He reports that Stannis' men have landed on the tourney grounds and more are crossing the river. The Mud Gate and the King's Gate are under attack, and Tyrion has led a sortie. Could you imagine this from Cersei's point of view? Tyrion's not a fighter. He's not even a good fighter, really. And he's the one leading this attack on the forces at the gates. If this is the case, the situation must be incredibly desperate, and the battle is close to over. Stannis is going to win, even with Tyrion's tricks. That's the way I'd be reading it if I was Cersei. Cersei mocks Tyrion's bravery and demands to know if Joffrey is with him. Osney explains Joffrey is at the trebuchets, operating them and fleeing the captured antlermen into the river. Cersei calls that folly, it's too dangerous, and orders that Joffrey be brought back to the castle. And we know this is a horrible move for Cersei, and you can understand why. She wants to protect her son, all this kind of stuff. But the fact is, Joffrey is the king. Him being there to show that he's trying to fight, he's trying to lead the men, is great for their morale. Once Joffrey leaves, it's a sign that the battle is over. Like, if you're an average person and you see your king is leaving the battlefield, what does that tell you? The battle is over, he's leaving you to die. That's what it tells me. And that is a big folly. Osney tries to hesitate at this, saying that the imp said. Cersei then cuts him off sharply, threatening to send him and Osmond on the next sortie if they disobey. And this is enough to basically get Joffrey sent back and Tyrion's orders to be not even really heard. And it's different the way the show does it. So the show doesn't have the Kettle Blacks, of course, and they use Lancel predominantly in the Kettle Blacks roles. And you see that Lancel has like this character arc in the show, which I actually think is pretty good. Like, he's willing to stand up to Cersei, and that gets him like pushed down and stuff. But I do think it's interesting the way the show changed that. And I actually think they did a pretty good job with that, even though it has repercussions later on because Kettle Blacks aren't in the story. But it is kind of like that final dagger. You know, if you're Tyrion, you're leading this sortie, you're already in a dangerous situation, Joffrey's being pulled back, the battle is on an edge of collapse. After dinner, many frightened guests ask to go pray in the sept, and Cersei allows it as Lady Tanda and her daughters leave among the first. Cersei's just happy to be rid of these people she doesn't care about. Those who remain listen to a harpist singing sad songs of Jonquil and Florian, Aemon and his queen, and Nymeria's ships. The sorrowful music brings many to tears, including Sansa, who feels her own eyes water. And Cersei at this is once again annoyed by this. Sansa, you're crying to music. We're in the middle of a battle, whatever. Like, that's what Cersei's thinking. She has no real sympathy for the young girl that Sansa is. And Cersei coldly praises her, saying, "Very good, dear, you'll need those tears for King Stannis," because she knows the battle is coming to a close, and Sansa's going to need it. She accuses Sansa of false loyalty, saying Tyrion's leadership proves how desperate things are, and she knows about her treasons in the Godswood. And this gets Sansa to instantly panic, because what does Cersei know about the Godswood? That her and Dantos have been plotting for her to escape? Or does she just know that she's going there? And so Sansa plays this really well. She doesn't show anything. She doesn't look at Dantos. She just says she's not doing any treason, just prayers. But Cersei is intelligent. She knows that Sansa's not praying for the Lannisters. She's not praying on their success. Why would she? They treated her horribly. And Cersei mocks her excuse, claiming Cersei prays for Stannis or her brother Robb, which she calls treason. When Sansa insists she prays for Joffrey, Cersei sneers, "Why? Because he treats you so sweetly." And again, it gets back to why so many people love Cersei, is because she's this person that's not willing to hide what she wants to say. And Cersei's completely right. Like, let's be honest here, Cersei's correct. And the idea that, like, Sansa doesn't care about the Lannisters, she's preying on their downfall, all that kind of stuff. But again, it gets back to that idea of, like, Cersei's drunk, she's just saying whatever comes into her head at this point. Cersei then pours Sansa sweet plum wine and commands her to drink, taunting her to find the courage to deal with the truth. And in a lot of ways, Cersei's trying to get Sansa to open up, to actually talk what's on her mind, to actually be honest and not having her guard up all the time, which is what alcohol usually does. And so that is what she's trying to do. And I find that really interesting, just given like how Cersei has been. Cersei has been a lot more open than she usually is because of the alcohol, of course. And it's provided such a very entertaining, especially from Cersei's side of things. As we get into page 641, the last page of the chapter, we really start to see the big reveal of the chapter. Cersei orders Sansa to drink the entire cup of sweet plum wine, calling it a command from her queen. The wine is quite thick, and Sansa, somebody that doesn't drink all that much, kind of struggles through it, but when she finishes it, she feels dizzy. When she refuses another, Cersei looks displeased. Cersei, being the alcoholic, wants Sansa to follow in her footsteps, and also just wants her to drink more. The queen then gives her big reveal. She says that she lied earlier about Sir Ilyn Payne's presence in the hall, a question that Sansa had, and us, the audience in our first read, also would have had. She summons Sir Ilyn forward, silent, grim, and holding ice unsheathed, its blade still dark with dried blood from the traitors that he had killed earlier. Cersei tells Sansa the truth. Sir Ilyn is not there for protection, but for them. He's here for us, she says coldly, explaining that if Stannis takes the city, she will not let him capture or judge her. And from Cersei's point of view, I totally get this. If you're Cersei, why bother going through the idea of you're going to be executed at any point? Why be judged by Stannis? Why be, humiliated and put through all this horribleness? Why not end your life on your own terms and not giving that power to Stannis? I definitely see why she would do this. Where she takes it a step too far is killing everybody else involved here as well, if this plan ever was to actually go through, which it doesn't. But I totally get why she's doing it, but it's still a very cold and really calculated plan. She says that I do not mean for him to have us alive, and that's the big point there. If you're Sansa, you're like, okay, I mean, Cersei's gonna kill herself. Weird, but okay. But then she says, us. And this implication horrifies Sansa. Sir Ilyn is to kill the queen and her companions if the city falls. Shows how desperate Cersei is of not giving any satisfaction of her enemies. And Cersei knows that. When Sansa weakly repeats us, Cersei says she heard her and that House Stark will take no joy from their fall, and even reaches out to push Sansa's hair away from her neck, implying her execution. It heightens the stakes so much because at first when you're reading this chapter, you're kind of like, okay, it's kind of just like a slow down the pace chapter, build into the tension to the final stretch of the Battle of the Blackwater-esque chapter. Then all of a sudden, you get to the end of this chapter and you're like, okay, this is huge. Sansa's life is at risk. Cersei is implying she might basically commit suicide. What is going to happen here? Because not only now did we have the lives of Joffrey and Tyrion and Davos and Stannis at play, now we have the lives of Cersei and Sansa at play as well, and even Shae if you want to go that far. So that is what I find is so interesting, is the way George is able to give us a chapter where this is almost completely a chapter analysis introduction for Cersei, while also being a tension chapter, like build up that tension while we're away from the battle. And then you have this crazy reveal at the end. So a great chapter from George. I think this is probably Sansa's best, and it's not even because of Sansa. I think I've said this almost every good Sansa chapter. This book is like, none of them are necessarily great because of Sansa as a character. A lot of them are great because of what's around her, like the characters that are being evolved or are being built, and we're seeing them through Sansa's POV, like Cersei. So thank you guys all for watching. Again, like I said in the intro, we will not be doing a reread until the beginning of January, so we'll finish out the book next year. I will say, I hope everybody has a happy Thanksgiving, has a good Christmas. You'll continue to see the podcast every Sunday to hopefully hold you guys over for the next year. So thank you guys all for watching. I'll see you guys all in the next one. Bye, guys.